Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable. And the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
After America is made on the lands of the Kure-Wurrung, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. We acknowledge that they and their ancestors have cared for the lands, rivers and sea, and all living creatures for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Welcome to After America. I'm Dr Emma Shortis, Director of International and Security Affairs at the Australia Institute. Liberation Day has come and gone.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time.
The shockwaves are still coming after Donald Trump's sweeping new tariffs. China has hit back today, announcing an extra 34% tax on all American goods being sold there.
The markets have lost trillions of dollars.
We're looking at the worst week for stocks since March of 2020.
Now, what's going to happen with the market, I can't tell you, but I can tell you our country has gotten a lot stronger.
But Australian politics hasn't broken free of old assumptions about how the world works. Donald Trump has made it clear that he does not care how his policies impact the United States' traditional allies. He is tearing up the established order. But here in Australia, our leaders are busy telling us that none of that applies to our security alliance with the United States. In the midst of a federal election campaign, we are busy having a debate about who'd be a better negotiator with Trump and who would be better placed to ensure the security alliance continues as it always has.
The Prime Minister can't even get a call, let alone arrange a meeting with the President. And it just shows that the Prime Minister doesn't have the gravitas or the ability to deal with the big issues that our country faces.
What I'd like is for Peter Dutton to stand up for Australia and to back Australia's national interest. This isn't a time for partisanship, I wouldn't have thought.
There is growing pressure on our foreign policy to change. Whether the Australian political and foreign policy establishment is willing or even able to respond to that pressure is unclear. There's no one better to discuss all this with than Dr Richard Dennis, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute. Richard is an economist, author and public policy commentator who's worked in academia, federal politics and think tanks for decades. Hi, Richard. Welcome to After America. It's great to finally have you here.
Thanks for having me on. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. Hey, Richard, it's been a few days now. Are you still feeling liberated?
I feel free. That's one thing Donald Trump just does in spades, isn't it? Yeah. He just walks around the world handing out freedom. Like so much Trump, he's so good at attracting attention. He's so good at drawing the eye and resetting the narrative. But, really what he says is so much more terrific than what he does. His big tariffs are a real problem. Don't get me wrong. We can talk about why, but impacts on Australia will be quite small in the short term. Mm-hmm. The real problem for Australia is that America's a big part of the world economy, and if Trump wrecks the American economy, it has an impact on the global economy, and that affects us. But there's a lot of other ways beyond tariffs that Trump can wreck the American economy, and he's working on them too.
Yeah, him and his team are working pretty hard on them. But as you say, Trump's so good at kind of sucking all the air out of the room, and that means there's been all this noise and heat around the tariffs. Can you explain what the fallout actually is? You mentioned that they could be a big problem, or they are a big problem. What is the actual fallout as opposed to the speculation about the fallout?
Yeah, well, let's talk about what a tariff is first. Like it's a tax on imports. All right. Now, Trump has kind of convinced himself and convinced a whole bunch of people in America that the rest of the world was kind of taking the piss from America and ripping them off. Well, let's just sort of start with Economics 101. Trade is voluntary exchange. Like no one's holding a gun to anyone's head. Why countries trade is the same reason that individuals trade, and that is that someone else has something that you want and you'd rather buy it off them than do it yourself. So I don't grow many carrots. I don't make a lot of homemade pasta. It's a long time since I built a stereo from scratch, right? So I trade with the world every day, and I hopefully provide services that some people value, and then with the money they give me, I go and buy stuff from other people. But the whole point of trade is it's voluntary. Now, to get to America, what's going on here? Americans have been buying lots of Australian beef. You know why? Because it was good and it was cheap. Right? That's why the Americans were buying Australian beef, because Americans looked and went, where can I get beef? And they could grow it in America, or they could buy it from other countries, or they could buy it from Australia. And a bunch of freedom-loving Americans free chose to buy some beef off Australians. Now, what Trump's come along and done is the opposite of freedom. He's kind of said, hey, freedom-loving Americans who are freedomly buying Australian beef, I'm going to put a tax on beef that crosses the border. Now, what that means is the price of American hamburgers is going to go up. All right, this is no doubt about this. Americans are going to pay more for hamburgers and more for French fries, even if they're not from France. And they're going to pay more for cars and more for stereos. That's an American problem. They're going to pay more for stuff. And does it have an impact on Australia? Well, yeah, a little bit. The first round effect, as an economist would say, is, well, at the moment, Americans are buying some of our beef. It's now going to get 10% dearer. So the Americans will buy probably less, but not no beef off us. So our beef exports to America will fall a bit. But you know what we'll do with the beef that we're not selling to America? We'll sell it to someone else. Right? Because it's not like the Americans were the only people who were freedomly buying our beef. So, America's going to be 10% worse off. And, Australian beef exporters might be 1 or 2% worse off because they're just going to sell the beef to the second highest bidder. The highest bidder used to be the Americans. They don't want our beef. All right, well, we'll sell it to the Koreans, or we'll sell it to the Chinese, or we'll sell it to someone else. So it will have an impact, but it won't have a big impact on us. The big impact on us is if America kind of tanks the world economy with a giant trade war about everything, well, then we'll sell less iron ore to China if China's selling less cars made out of our iron ore, or less fridges made out of iron ore. And that's down the track, but that's the bigger risk, not the impact on beef exports.
During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
Yeah, right. And Richard, we've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, that it is that silly, isn't it? Like it's the misunderstanding of basic economics is so bad, but that sits alongside this being actually really quite risky and dangerous. And so it makes it, I don't know about you, but it makes it really hard to talk about because you're talking about something simultaneously so ridiculous and so dangerous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous economics with potentially serious consequences. Look, I think the thing to understand about Donald Trump, the thing to understand about a lot of populist right-wing leaders, including Peter Dutton in Australia, is that what they're actually trying to do is cause problems, not fix them. Right? And I think progressives need to get their head around this. We're like, I'm not even sure that will really work. It's like, pull out a textbook. I think they've misunderstood the theory that sits behind what they're saying. They know. Okay. They're not stupid. They're just saying stupid things. So what Trump is trying to do is say, I'm on America's side. I'm on America's side. Watch me tax foreigners. I'm on America's side. And for people who are too busy or just not interested in politics or don't have the time or don't even speak enough English to go and dig into a lot of what Trump's saying, they're hearing the meta message loud and clear. I'm on America's side. I'm taxing foreigners. And then if Trump puts America into recession, he'll just blame unions, right? He'll just blame state Democrat governors or like, you got to get your head around these people aren't trying to fix problems. They're trying to cause problems. They're trying to draw lines of us and them. So doesn't mean we shouldn't call out the absurdity of the economics, but in calling out the absurdity of the economics, we have to simultaneously push further in and say, so what are these people doing? Because it's just comforting to say they're dumb. They're not dumb. They're just not trying to solve the problem that you think they should be trying to solve.
Yeah. And I mean, I would take that further as well and say that the politics of it is not straightforward either, because in so much of the commentary, there's this inbuilt assumption that, exactly as you say, these tariffs are likely to raise prices in the United States. And then the assumption about that is that will have immediate political fallout for Trump. There's talk about bloodbath at the midterms and how, inflation got Joe Biden. And so, of course, it's going to get Donald Trump as well. And I think this is what you were partly getting at. I don't think the politics of it is that straightforward, especially in support for Trump, because his supporters, his base, is very good at redirecting blame. As you said, he's so good at redirecting blame and good at almost kind of memory holing the worst effects of the Trump administration. Is that the way that you see it, or do you think that the politics of it is actually that straightforward when it comes to, the impact of economics on people's political decision making?
No, I think you're spot on. I think that the economics is straightforward. The politics are so much more complicated than I think what a lot of, Democrat strategists in America can comprehend. Trump is fueled by other people's anger. Trump is a step ahead in the redirection of that anger and the blaming of someone else. So if he makes inflation worse and he makes people angrier, Politics 101 says, the angry people will then blame Donald Trump. Ha-ha. And then the Democrats will step in and offer a plausible alternative.
Well, yeah.
That might happen. Or actually, Trump does some rage harvesting and goes to his base and says, inflation's gone up and it's that person over there's fault, or that's why we have to crack down on some immigrants further, or I don't know, he's better at this than me. Like, that's my insight, understand that this guy is playing a different game. And he's about to cause inflation. Yes, he's about to slow economic growth. Yes, he's probably going to push the world economic growth down. How much, well, we'll see, but no one thinks he's going to push it up. All that's going to happen, and that's bad. But the idea that he'll then put his hand up, do a mea culpa, and say, whoopsie, it turns out the Democrats were better economic managers than me all along, allow me to recalibrate. Like, in what world are people planning for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people still are, which is kind of scary. But one of the connections I think that also maybe doesn't get made even here from Australia is that relationship between Trump's economic policies and politics more broadly, because, when you kind of read that the politics of this is really straightforward and there's going to be a bloodbath at the midterms, that assumes that American democracy and the institutions of American democracy survive and continue. But, I mean, surely Trump's economic policies, these kind of attacks on the established economic order, are related in some way to his attacks on democracy.
Oh, absolutely. But just to be clear, Trump didn't invent this, right? He's just more audacious at it. So in Australia for 30 years, we've been told we have to have free trade agreements so we can have free trade because free trade is so good. But actually, the Australia-US free trade agreement's 1,400 pages long because it documents all the politically acceptable restrictions on trade. So to be clear, we've never had a free trade agreement with the US. You can't import guns from America freely. You can't import all sorts of crops into Australia freely. There has never been free trade between Australia and the US. But negotiating a free trade agreement was a highly political activity. And, for Australians that haven't figured this out, Conservatives have always been better at signing free trade agreements or negotiating free trade agreements in Australia. Conservatives have always been better at that than Labor. Why? Because what most countries want is free trade in manufactured goods. And the Liberal and National Party in Australia have always been happy to sign a trade agreement that expands the National Party's base, expands the agriculture sector's ability to export beef or rice or whatever, in exchange for smashing the Australian manufacturing industry, because the manufacturing industry was highly unionised, which, the Conservatives always seen as a problem, while the agriculture sector is, the National Party's base. So, when John Howard was doing a free trade agreement with George Bush, it's not like he was unaware. Oh, the Americans want me to hurt the manufacturing industry. Yes, I'm willing to hurt Australian manufacturing in order to help Australian agricultural exporters. Howard knew what he was doing. Trump knows exactly what he's doing. Trump's just, as Trump does, doing it bigger with far less concern for the consequences for other people and far less concern with the blowback, because, to be clear, Trump's anticipating the blowback and he's already setting up his plans for how to redirect that blowback at his next opponent.
Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want it to affect their farmers. And you know what? I don't blame them, but we're doing the same thing right now, starting about midnight tonight, I would say.
I mean, Richard, do you think that there's a risk that Trump or the Trump administration will come after more aspects of that free trade agreement with Australia that they're not happy with, or their economic relationship more broadly?
Oh, absolutely. So again, we had a document called a free trade agreement, which made it impossible to talk about which bits of trade we wanted to protect and which ones we were willing to sacrifice, because the meta language of calling it a free trade agreement meant that economists like me got asked dumb questions like, so do you support free trade or oppose it? It's like, well, okay, I can write a free trade agreement in one page. There'll be no restrictions on trade between Australia and the US. Right? The other 1,400 pages are the restrictions. We never had the democratic debate about that. Now what we've got is the US reneging on that. Right? The US has imposed tariffs on us in contradiction of the free trade agreement we had with them. The question for Australia is, well, what are we going to renege on? What are we going to pull back? Now, we changed our copyright laws to suit the Americans. We changed our pharmaceutical benefit scheme to suit the Americans. Not as much as Big Pharma wanted, but yes, we made changes to the PBS back when John Howard was Prime Minister. So given that the Americans have walked away from their side of the deal by imposing tariffs on our steel and aluminium, why wouldn't we just go back to our old copyright laws or our old PBS laws? Now, obviously, if we did that, Trump's like, well, I'll give you another hit then, right? So he's not going to admit, oh, yeah, fair enough. I walked away from our side of the deal. Of course, you should walk back the promises you made. So, yeah, look, bully's got a bully, and he'll take another swing at us whenever taking a swing at us is a way to say, I put America first. Yeah. There's nothing subtle about what he's trying to do. He's told us he puts America first. We're trying to have an alliance. We're trying to have a respectful relationship with someone who has made it clear to us will always put us second in that relationship. So why would we be surprised if he does it again?
Yeah, well, we shouldn't be. It doesn't mean that some people won't be.
I think we were in a room full of them recently.
We were, yes. We might get to that. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that the coalition, the Conservatives in Australia have historically been better at negotiating those kinds of agreements. Does that mean you think that opposition leader Peter Dutton is right to claim that he would be better placed to negotiate with Donald Trump?
Oh, if negotiate means selling out, sure. Right? That's the point, right? Yeah. The reason that the Liberals signed so many free trade agreements, especially after Tony Abbott was elected, was because they just rang up and said, I'll sign. And the people we were writing the deals with were, sign what? And we were like, whatever you want. So it was hard for Labor governments to engage in some trade agreements because they weren't willing to throw whole parts of the Australian economy under the bus in order to get some small gains for another part of the economy. Whereas because the coalition didn't care about the car industry, for example, Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott sort of waved it farewell. I remember the front page in the Fin Review, kind of Hockey was good riddance, and now you got Liberals running around saying we need Australian manufacturing. It's like, you're the guys that literally bid it farewell. So yeah, when I say better, I don't mean better at managing the Australian economy. I don't mean better at making decisions and standing up to foreign governments in a way that's good for Australia. I mean better at not caring about parts of Australia, which makes it easier to sign a deal that hurts Australian manufacturing, but yeah, helps the sugar industry, who are major donors to the Liberal Party, for example.
Yeah. Do you think one of the things that has changed, or maybe that Trump has revealed because he's so good at kind of revealing those hidden truths, is some of the contradictions there at the heart of kind of conservative alignment with the United States here in Australia? Because the coalition does seem to be now in this kind of weird space where on some issues it is ideologically aligned with Trump and Trumpism more broadly, around Dutton's comments around government efficiency, or even the Department of Education more recently. But he's also trying to say that he is better placed to stand up to Trump. He's, got quite a different position on Ukraine. Like, do you think he can get away with that kind of picking and choosing?
I doubt it. I think that, democracies don't work the way the textbook says they do. Politics is more complicated and interesting than the newspaper analysis of it suggests. And it's partly because so many things are happening at the same time. So, we hear this sort of language of culture war a lot in Australia and the US. Well, culture does matter. And, some people will vote for a political party because they feel culturally aligned with them on race grounds or religious grounds, or I don't know, just how often they say small business or something, right? But this matters. Every vote counts, and how much thoughtfulness, policy analysis went into the vote is this kind of bizarre progressive sort of construct. So, so culture matters, material economic reality matters, and also claims about how my policy will affect your material economic reality matters. So the Conservatives in Australia have historically had this kind of head start where, we've been told for decades, the Liberals are better economic managers. And because people have been told they're better economic managers, when the Liberals say, vote for me and I'll do this policy thing and that'll be good for the economy, people think, oh, well, yes, and I suppose they are the better economic managers. Like, whether that's materially true or not takes years to find out, but the vote happens this month regardless. Imagine you got a group of friends and someone meets someone and everyone says, oh, this guy or this girl, they're the funny one. They're really funny. They're really funny. They're really funny. They tell a joke. Guess what? People are more likely to laugh. Right? So the Liberals kind of carry that baggage along, whatever, good for them. But I think this is all a lot harder for the coalition now than it used to be, because I think the coalition used to just say things like, I'm on the side of free markets, I'm on the side of free trade, I'm a good economic manager. Being a good economic manager is being about small government and free markets and free trade. Here's a collection of words that seem to persuade you, right? Whereas now we're living in a world where conservative politicians in another country are saying free trade's a crap idea. Trump is like, I'm out of this. I want to put America first. And Dutton's like, yes, I too want to put Australia first, through free trade and through protection and strong. I'm a strong leader. Like, so there's this cognitive dissonance going on now, and conservatives in Australia are kind of falling to pieces over this because part of them wants to just be on Trump's side because being on the side of a bully is always fun. Part of them wants to put Australia first and be Australian strong men and women. And part of them want to stick with free trade because their whole political career they've been lying about how important free trade and freedom was. So they're torn three ways. Do they suck up and say Trump's right and we should get with the program? Do they say, no, we need to kind of copy Trump but put Australia first, not America? Or do we stick with the old world order and just keep saying free trade a lot? Well, they're all just spiraling around the toilet bowl at the moment and no one knows what's going to go down first.
That's quite
Sorry. Well, it's not going to end well, right? We know it's not going to end well. We can't just suck up to Trump because if we do, he'll just give us another whack because he has to put America first. He's not hiding that. If we're going to just emulate his policies and put Australia first, well, the size and the structure of our economy is quite different. We're not going to have a silicon chip production in Australia. That's not going to happen in any meaningful thing. We're going to have to trade with someone, right? But are we going to go back to the old free trade rules and be the only country that's trying to do the old version of free trade while everyone else is using tariffs and industry policy to protect, right? So the Conservatives are going to have to change a lot. They know it. So this terrain is actually harder for them. And while Labor hasn't figured out what to do about it yet, it's easier for Labor to say, well, we were always a bit sceptical of that free trade stuff. We've always been a bit enthusiastic about industry policy. This is what we've always been trying to say. We want to have a bit of, we want trade where it's good for us, but we want to put, Australian jobs and Australian industry first. So it's much safer ground for Labor. They just, in the middle of an election campaign, haven't figured out what to do on that ground. Whereas the Conservatives, they're in a world of intellectual pain.
The Defence Minister remains confident that there's no risk to AUKUS despite America's decision to slap 25% tariffs on Aussie steel and aluminium.
America remains committed to AUKUS. We saw that in the meeting that I had with my counterpart, Secretary Pete Hegseth. We are very encouraged by the strength of American leadership, as demonstrated by the comments of Secretary Hegseth and indeed others in the Trump administration. And it's not surprising because the AUKUS arrangement is obviously in the interests of Australia, but it's in the interests of the United States.
And maybe that's also partly because neither of them has figured out how to talk about the overarching issue of national security. They're not used to this being something that they have to talk about, particularly in an election campaign, at least not in this way, where there is really significant and I think growing public pressure on the kind of established assumptions around the US alliance more broadly, not just the economic relationship, but the security relationship as well. We've talked about the polling we've done a lot on this podcast around, more Australians preferring an independent foreign policy, for example, than they do a closer alliance with the United States, which is a significant shift, right? And it seems like, at least anecdotally for me, it seems like that's shifting a lot. Like doing media commentary last week around the tariffs, every single radio interview I did started with some vox pops or some text lines from people who are furious about the way the Trump administration is treating Australia and linking it to AUKUS. So many people saying cancel the AUKUS deal because the Trump administration is treating us this way. Like that's a huge shift in the way that at least some Australians think about our security and our relationship with the United States. And so there's this pressure coming from below, and Trump is setting the agenda around, commentary around the federal election. But at the same time, foreign policy has been so locked in Australia for so long that it seems entirely possible that it's too locked in to change and to change quickly. What do you think the risks and the opportunities are of this, I guess, kind of commentary around the alliance that we're facing? And do you think it's possible that things might change?
Oh, things are going to change. The question is whether we play a role in shaping that change or whether we just sit back denying it and let the Americans and others tell us what the change will be. I mean, my starting point is always behaviour is a good predictor of behaviour. And here we are in this close alliance with the US, where the US has just said, no, stuff you, we're going to put our interests way ahead of yours. Now, they've done that in the trade space, and we're busy telling ourselves, but they'd never do that in the defence space. Oh, no, that's quite separate. It's like, sorry, the guys just said it's America first. The guys just ripped up our free trade agreement, imposed punitive tariffs on us, said he might come back and give us another whack. That's how he's treating us. That's how he's behaving. But in this other domain, oh, no, he's rock solid, mate. No, he's rock solid. How do you know that? Oh, well, because I'd be really scared if I said anything different. Like, it's the job of our Department of Foreign Affairs. It's the job of our Defence Department to map out scenarios and figure out, okay, of all the things that could happen, which ones do we think are most likely? Which ones do we think are most scary? Which ones do we need to protect ourselves against? Which ones do we need to do everything we can to prevent? It is the job of the Australian Public Service to entertain the idea that things might change. And really, I mean, what an embarrassment that we have so many senior public servants in the role of helping us plan long-run foreign affairs and defence relationships, saying, oh, no, things can't change. That'd be way too scary. There can be no plan B. So, yeah, again, behaviour is a good predictor of behaviour. Never be surprised when people do what it says on the box. Trump is doing what it says on the box, and some people in Australia are telling us, oh, but that's only in one domain. He wouldn't behave like that in other domains. Those people might not change their mind, so therefore we'll have to change those people if we're going to get an Australian foreign policy, an Australian trade policy that actually looks after Australia.
Yeah, and actually sees those two things as linked, that actually trade is not separate from security.
Well, Dutton's already come out and said he wants to join them up, and as if Donald Trump doesn't see everything as linked. Like, that's the point. He causes pain on one thing, so people come and offer him something else. He's been telling the Europeans for a long time he wants them to spend a lot more on defence, in particular buying American defence equipment. And, now he's having a trade war with the people who he was disappointed with. So, although interestingly, you got, Musk out over the weekend saying maybe we should have a free trade zone between America and the US. It's like America and the EU. It's like, yeah, maybe you should have said that a week or so ago.
Yeah, Musk is probably, that's a whole another episode maybe, Richard, that we can do in the future to talk about. Yeah, Elon Musk's economic policy. That'd be a fun one.
Oh, hey, God.
Thank you so much for your time and your generosity in cutting through so much of the noise around the Trump administration and Australia's relationship with the US. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for all the great podcasts.
If you're enjoying After America, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. It makes a big difference. This episode was recorded on Monday, the 7th of April. No doubt a bunch of stuff will have happened since then. It's all too much. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.